Good morning. So for those of you who don't know me, I've been around for a long time, primarily on the big diesels, but got a chance a couple years ago to start working on a new program and a new engine platform at Stellantis, North America. And this presentation is going to step you through, I would say, a painful chapter for the last year and a half. But the reason I brought this here today is when I went to my first symposium back in 2006, a long time ago, part of the presentations that were the most exciting to me were people like Hal and John and the rest of them standing up here and telling us what didn't work and what were the challenges they ran into, and don't repeat our mistakes if we made them. So please feel free to ask questions when we get to the end of this. I can tell you the story is not completely done. I don't have a forever after happy at the end of this, but we'll step everybody through the challenges that we saw as we worked on these wonderful requirements we all know and love with misfire monitoring. I'm not going to read them verbatim here, but I think we're all aware of the requirements that CARB has about misfire, and we'll start talking about some of the challenges with that. So the platform I'm doing this effort on is a spark ignition inline 4-cylinder engine with a hybrid electric system that consists of twin electric motors, basically an electronic CVT. So there's a dual mass flywheel in the system between the engine and motor A, just to kind of level set everybody with what's the hardware set that we're having to deal with. So as we started this process oh so long ago and got into our first mule vehicles, this was our engine RPM stability chart. And as you can see, our RPM was all over the place and it had a very negative impact on our ability to understand what was going on with misfire in the vehicles. So that was our first challenge. We worked with the hardware teams on how do we address that challenge. Of course, the first thing out of everybody's mouth is, well, can't you fix it with software or calibration? And the answer and the response was no. So as we all know, it takes the hardware guys a long time to implement hardware change. The solution in the end to try to address this RPM hold issue was really increasing the rotational mass of the flywheel. Could that help us dampen out these engine stability issues? So we thought we had that problem fixed, and we continued down the path of developing the misfire calibration for the product. And now we've got a new issue. So we installed the prototype flywheel with the increased rotational mass. And as we were running some of our early misfire calibration work, we started seeing a ringing that was occurring and was driving additional false misfire detections. And the key here on that top chart is you'll notice the spike here that looks just as dramatic as the actual intended misfire value. So how do you decide what is the correct misfire and what's the false? So the bottom chart just gives you a chart of what we would expect it to look like. Sorry, of course, that's my work phone and somebody's calling me. Okay, so we continue to work on the noise issue. Where's it really coming from? Is it from the motors? Is it from the dual mass flywheel? This is a single chart, shows us between 1500 and 1700 RPM, single random misfire events, a continuously misfiring cylinder. And where are we seeing? What we're seeing really here is poor separation between the amplitudes that we're looking for. Oops. So it's not giving us the separation we need to understand what is the single cylinder that's misfiring for us. Now we increase the RPM a little bit. It didn't really help us. We're beginning to see some separation. We're beginning to see that cylinder that's giving us what we would expect to be a higher and be more separated than the rest of them, but we still have a lot of noise. And how can we robustly pinpoint what cylinder is causing the issue? Now we increase up to 3000 RPM. We're really trying to understand the scope of how big of an operating space is this misfire issue in. Here, we finally start seeing a good separation, significant enough that we can actually make an appropriate decision. So now we've figured out the range, right? It's only from low idle all the way to 3000 RPM. So, what can we do with calibration to fix this? And then, of course, here we brought her up to 4000 RPM, and the separation gets even better. Things look good. But ask yourself the question, what kind of item is causing the noise at the lower RPMs, but not the upper RPMs. Why are we seeing this pattern, right? So we started looking at what were our potential options. Could we do a multi-pass filter? Could we do an active intrusive misfire test? We all know CARB and their hatred of the word intrusive. So that really wasn't an option we wanted to go after. Could you do some sort of suppression? You started detecting misfire, let's suppress the other false misfire events. Or could we develop a virtual engine speed, utilizing inputs from the e-motor speed control to try to dampen out in the engine RPM signal what was happening, the additions added to the system from the electric motor. So we started looking at how do we do a corrected virtual engine RPM. If you take a look at this data here, you're going to see the noise on the engine speed charts on the left, and you're going to see the e-motor speed chart. The one on the right really makes it a little bit easier to see completely because you've got your unfiltered speeds, you've got what the e-motors are doing to you, and then we've got this nice e-motor speed in here and how it's going at us. How do we create a virtual engine speed, the blue line, oops, I keep hitting the wrong button here, the blue line, to dampen out what the e-motor is doing to us. So we decided to create some models. We decided to use the data we had at hand, and we started taking a look at what could we do with a virtual engine speed that tries to minus out what the e-motors are doing to us. And you're going to see a couple charts here where we're basically going through the data, we're putting it through the model, and we're saying, well, here's what happens with the uncorrected signals, the blues. It's a big mess. You really can't tell the difference between what cylinders are causing the issue and the corrected. Now, the key I want to bring you back to is the corrected still isn't perfect, but it is a heck of a lot better than the uncorrected. So while I might not be able to save the world, can I at least do the detection that we're legally required to do and do it in a robust manner? And that's really the key here. So we're looking at pinpointing, we're talking about it. Those of you who have run misfire many, many years, you'll notice these charts. So, you know, over here on the left side, you've got single misfire on a random cylinder, then you got permanent misfire on a single cylinder, you got permanent misfire on paired cylinders, permanent misfire on consecutive cylinders. That top chart is our uncorrected. So you can see how bad the overall engine RPM is. And then you got the corrected signal in the middle, and you got the uncorrected, what the misfire algorithms are calculating on the bottom. And if it's not obvious, I just thought back to this, I hadn't said it yet. The way we're doing misfire is based on crank or engine RPM, right? This is not with some sensor, it's not some other method. It's the good old reliable engine RPM misfire algorithm. So the models are looking good, right? Data's looking good. We're putting it through the models. We can, utilizing the e-motor speeds as an input, we think we can correct it, and we think that correction is letting us detect everything exactly the way it should be. Sometimes things are too good to be true, but we'll keep looking at it here. So here we're up at 2100 RPM. With the data we've got, we still see pretty good separation. You can see a little bit of noise going on, but there's still really good separation here in the signals, right? So we think we've got a path to a solution here. Now, the devil's always in the details. The models looked great, but the models don't have to deal with CAN data links between multiple ECMs and bus loading and everything else that comes with this under the mountains. So what we did was a quick determination of, well, how fast does the engine ECM need to see the e-motor speeds coming from the electric motor controller in order to do this? And we ended up saying we needed to have the message on the bus at 5 milliseconds. Now, anybody knows CAN data links will go, wow, yep, yeah, that will load it down. And of course, what was our current? We were currently broadcasting at 10 milliseconds. So, we spent months getting the new dual mass flywheel built. We got that built. And now we're going to spend months working with the CAN network folks, getting permission to change the network, which is already overloaded, to add a new message that's broadcasting at 5 milliseconds instead of 10. I can tell you the end story of that. It happened. We got it to work. It took a lot of gnashing of teeth and yelling and people unhappy and what are you going to do to my bus? But we were able to get a new CAN message created with just the information we needed. That's the other part. In the normal system, the e-motor speeds were buried in a much larger message. So when we first came to them and said we needed it at 5 milliseconds, they really had heart attacks because that message was just too big. So we ended up creating a new message with just the base information we had to have. And that significantly changed the amount of load that put on the bus. And then we did not put that message on the primary bus. We put that message on a secondary bus that already had a lighter load already. So now we can get the message. Okay. Never a shortage of surprises with this issue here. So vehicle testing didn't show the same results as the models. Surprise, surprise. The investigation showed the e-motor speeds, which were being communicated as a raw value, because, hey, we asked for it at 5 milliseconds. We should really give you raw, right? No. We needed to have it filtered. And filtering it on the engine ECM side really didn't look like the appropriate path. We needed to filter it a bit more on the e-motor side. Now here comes another problem, and a problem I'm sure many people here in the room have experienced in the past. You're working with 3 different suppliers in 4 different continents, and you get into a room and everybody agrees we're going to put in a filter and we're going to put in this filter, and then they go off and implement it. You get your prototype software, and guess what? What one person said, I need this filter, the other team implemented what they thought they heard, but it was a different filter. So we got to this wonderful point where we still had issues. We still had problems. It wasn't really aligning itself up. We had to work with the teams in order to get the filters in line. So we get the filters in line, another prototype software build, another set of software and hardware. And now we finally get to our first vehicles built in plant, built with plan of record production hardware for the entire powertrain, right? That's kind of important to understand the entire rotational mass of your system and how the system's interacting with itself. So as we're going through calibrating misfire across the entire speed torque range of the engine and the powertrain, we start noticing a problem in this engine RPM band. About 2100 RPM to 2500 RPM. And the first time we shared this data inside our company, someone said, well, Lonnie, why don't you just apply that virtual engine speed filter you've been talking about for 6 months? And I'm like, that's already got this applied. We've already applied the mathematics to this, and we're still seeing resonance. And where is this from, right? I didn't point it out specifically, but early on, all this noise that we were seeing in some of these early signals were because, you got to remember, I'm an old diesel guy, big engines, lots of cylinders. Well, what happens if you lose one cylinder on an inline 4 continuously? You've lost 25% of your powertrain torque, right? So what is the natural response of the e-motor system in that case? It's going to be to cover it up, right? That's what it's there for. And one of the solutions some folks talked about as well, should we calibrate the response back on the e-motor system? And our decision in the end was not to do that, right? Because you don't want to take 25% of the torque away from the customer, have them experience that level of loss of performance. So we needed to find a workaround with that, right? Well, now we get to this point, and we're nearing the end of our investigation. We've got the plan of record hardware finally. We've got all the software, everything's looking good, but we've got this narrow band that we're getting noise on. So we got the band back together. We hadn't been meeting, daily for like 6 months because this was a 1.5-year process. And the hardware engineer looks at us and goes, well, that in that band, that kind of amazingly aligns up with the resonance frequency of the dual mass flywheel. Oh, joy. Okay, so what are we going to do here? We started taking a look at, well, do we actually run the vehicle in that speed band? And luckily for me, I've got a team of folks analyzing data coming off of all of our test vehicles. So it wasn't very difficult for us to come up with a heat map, tell us where we're operating. So you guys can see we're not operating in that band. Close, but not there, right? So our opportunity to have this issue is, while not zero, is certainly not going to happen every day to most customers. Next, we talk about, well, what is the impact and what is going to happen? With that much noise on the signals, without the separation, what's the potential? What we found out on the vehicle is that in every case, we detected the correct cylinder. This is really a pinpointing issue. It's not that we can't detect misfire. God knows you can detect more than one cylinder. And that's been our whole fight this entire time on this program, was how do we pinpoint to the correct cylinder? So we know we detect the correct cylinder, but we are seeing counts on the adjacent or the companion cylinder, basically. So what's the risk, right? What's the likelihood that a customer is going to stay operating in this range that they normally don't operate in and allow that counter to count up far enough to actually set a misfire code? We didn't think it was that high. We approached the regulators and said, we'd like to get an EO approval of how we've implemented this system. We know there's a potential in this area to set another code, but we don't think it's very high. And what do you guys think CARB's response to that was? So the feedback we got just Monday, so I don't have a slide on here on that, is it's a deficient implementation. If you log the 302 and then later log the 304, you're deficient. You should not do those two items. But CARB did give us a path to go after, which would be, instead of lighting that 304, light a 300. Now, it's a change to software, again, but, you know, it is a potential, and I'm thankful for them coming back to us with that. You know, we know where the band is, right? We know where the issue is. So we can change the software, add some cals and say, okay, if we have already detected a misfire event and we're in this range and we're getting a second misfire event, instead of logging the 304 or the 303, the other individual specific misfire cylinder fault code, we'll just log a P300. So that's hot off the presses. Just wanted to make sure I share that with everybody, because that's what the symposium is really about, is how do we share with each other the things we've learned. So final thoughts. Hardware changes take forever. And that's once you convince them to do it, right? Nobody wants to do that. They always want the easy software or cheap calibration fix. Second, software changes across multiple suppliers take time. And typically, as with any company, we're always rushing to get solutions. And sometimes those solutions can become unaligned. My story about how the filters could be implemented differently between two different continents. The final production system dynamics can lead to additional issues. You guys saw it was just one thing after another after another. And then the bottom bullet here is, you know, make sure you're engaging your corporate misfire technical experts early in the process. Supplier controls, calibrations teams, to make sure that you look at the system as a whole and try to identify what noises you're going to experience. It's the only way to do it without getting into this rush at the end right before production, as you work on how do you make sure that you have a robust and compliant solution. So we still have 5-6 minutes. Any questions about misfire on a small gas engine in a hybrid system?
Thank you. Very interesting presentation. And yes, one about actual diagnostic issue. So thank you for that one. I had one question. How much scrutiny did you get from ARB on which diagnostic you have to make on the e-motor speed itself? Now you use it as an input to your misfire diagnostic.
You're asking about a rationality on the e-motor speed?
Yes. What push did you get to implement? Of course, a simple rationality diagnostic is probably not that difficult, but you use it in a very specific way. So did you have to do a lot of additional work on that signal?
We have our basic e-motor diagnostics that have been supplied to us from the supplier. So we haven't done anything in additional yet. No one's asked us to do anything additionally that I'm aware of.
Oh, okay, so maybe I shouldn't have brought up the topic then. One ideas, but CARB is not here. So.
No, it's a good question. No one's asked us to do anything different though.
Thank you.
There was another question.
Hi, Christian Salazar, TE Engineering. This noise signal you had, was it several different loads or was it just a certain load?
So if you're talking about the initial issue we had, it was across the entire speed load range. And really what it came down to is as the engine loses 25% of its torque, the e-motor system and the e-motor control sees that drop in torque and compensates. And that causes a ringing in the RPM signal, right? So we had it everywhere. When we introduced the virtual speed sensor, that really corrected that and gave us a lot better separation, a lot better pinpointing. And then when we got the final plan of record production powertrain system, got it in and started going through the entire calibration map for the entire speed load range, that's where we started finding in this narrow band, we're hitting the resonant frequency of the dual mass flywheel, which was adding an additional noise that not even the virtual speed sensor with all of its filters could compensate for.
Thanks.
Yep.
Ronnie, just a question on my side. When you got the hybrid vehicle, you are not always having the combustion engine and the electrical motor acting together. So when it's only the combustion engine, I suppose that you are not having this kind of issue.
If it's just an ICE engine,
Yeah.
you could still have an issue if you have a dual mass flywheel between you and the mechanical transmission, right? Because the dual mass flywheel is just going to add noise to the system, period. But the issue we ran into specifically is because the hybrid system was trying to compensate for the loss in torque in the engine. So it was truly the hybrid powertrain that got us in this path early.
Okay, so it's clearly linked to the reaction, to the immediate reaction of the e-motor to compensate the lack of the. Okay, good.
Yeah, and that's where you really need your system level collaboration to understand. Because if you talk to most performance folks, drivability, they're going to say, well, of course, if I lose 25% of my torque, and if I have an e-motor there that can compensate for it, why shouldn't I, right? The issue is we need to detect that loss, right? That's the requirement we've got. So if we lose that injector, we need to be able to detect it. How can you do that while we're trying to do the least amount of impact to the performance of the vehicle?
Just out of curiosity, obviously we don't know what engine this is, but was there a correlation between the band that you saw and the peak torque of that engine?
No, the peak torque is in a different area there. In the end, the mechanical guys came right back when the final end, this last chart, this final band of noise that we saw, even with the implementation of the virtual speed, it lines up right on top of the natural frequency for the dual mass flywheel. So it's the resident, it's there. There's nothing else we can do to really clean that up. So at this point, it's looking at the potential other solutions to make CARB happy. I mean, the big thing I thought was important is with the virtual speed sensor implementation, we always detect the correct cylinder. We just have this resonance band area due to the natural frequency of the dual mass flywheel where we start seeing, and that's the key in my mind. During development, we've actually never gotten it all the way to where we got the additional code to set. We're just seeing increments of the misfire counter, right? So being the conservative people we are, when we made the presentation to CARB, it says you could potentially set a second code. And we showed the POD charts to them, and CARB and their wisdom is like, yeah, that's too much of a chance. You don't want to do that. That is deficient.